Welcome to the Campus Ministry Today podcast. I'm Paul Wooster with my co-host Steve Shadrack. The two of us are just back from Nashville, Tennessee, where we were involved in a big conference called Collegiate Summit with about 600 plus church-based and campus-based leaders. Shad and I are more fired up than ever to serve you, the collegiate body of Christ, to encourage, inspire, and equip you to take the gospel to the campus and to the world. Today's guest has been challenging staff and students to do just that for well over 20 years. And so before Shad introduces his close friend to us, we want to give you one last opportunity to hear about Global Project. We have over 75 ministries around the world that are interested in committing in this do-it-yourself, plug-and-play summer project we're calling Global Project. So check it out at globalproject.org. And we're actually kicking it off, dropping some of the content this week. And for those that are getting started, but it's not too late to jump in on that. So Shad, let's jump into our guest. Can you introduce our guest to us?
I would be honored to. A lot of the folks listening in today will know who Todd Ahrend is. Excuse me, Dr. Todd Ahrend. Let's show him a little bit of respect, right. Okay? Nice. They've been impacted by the traveling team ministry, one of his great books, or the many times and places he's spoken all over the U.S., all over the world, over the years. He's originally from Tulsa, Oklahoma. I'm going to give a little bit of a longer bio this time because I know him so well and love and respect him so well. But we got to meet him. I was involved with student mobilization, as many of our listeners know, STUMO. And we got to meet him when he was a student, a wild man, really, at Northeastern State University in Tahlequah, Oklahoma. And he was kind of mobilized and recruited by one of our staff people. I'm going to ask him about that story here in a moment, actually. But he actually became the campus director for STUMO at University of Tulsa for a number of years. And Todd needs to tell us the exact year, but I approached him and I said, how would you like to launch this traveling team concept? There had been a ministry years earlier called Caleb Project that had done that, but we wanted to take the baton, take the mantle from them and see if we could initiate themselves. He was the perfect guy to do it. Todd, I remember sitting in that Kentucky Fried Chicken in Alma, Arkansas, as we were kind of designing things out on a little napkin there. We need to find that napkin and frame it, don't we? But I remember wanting to call it the Global Mobilization Impact Team or something. And Todd goes, no. Let's just call it the traveling team. I felt sure it was going to fall flat on its face. Here it is 20 years later. It's impacted the whole world for Christ. But anyway, I learned early on, Paul, to really listen to Todd and to take his suggestions very carefully. He recruited travelers. We started putting together a schedule with different campus ministries and churches. And lo and behold, their credibility grew and their impact grew, their influence grew. And so he got into a van and spent 6 years crisscrossing all 48 states here, some of those years with his wife, Jessica, really impacting hundreds of thousands of students. Wow. And on hundreds and hundreds of campuses. And now 21 years later, one of his key disciples, Claude Hickman, are leading this whole thing, and it continues to have impact around the world. And their main message as they speak to students is night after night, campus after campus, is God's heart for the nations from Genesis to Revelation, how these students can give their lives to reaching the nations for Christ. Well, Todd lives in the same town I do. I'm honored that we would live in the same town, Fayetteville, Arkansas, and he's married to Jessica. And I lose track with how many children. They keep adding children, you know. and I'm thinking the number is up to 6. Todd's going to have to correct me there, but at least a couple of them are adopted. They're just cute as can be. But Todd, I went on and on. Sorry about that, bro. But give our listeners a few more details about your life and ministry that I left out, or correct anything that I obviously, you know, my older brain is left out. So, what other details would you throw in there, Toddy?
Man, no, you did great. I appreciate that. And I remember, you know, just graduating college and having a heart for missions. And, you know, Steve and I sat on a park bench and he said, hey, what if there was a team, kind of like the student volunteer movement of old? that went campus to campus, and my heart just caught on fire. I mean, I was like, "You're talking to me, man," and he's like, "But hey, there's no name, there's no organization, there's no money, there's no staff. It's just whoever's gonna do it. It's whoever's gonna do it." And I right there on that park bench, it's one of these moments that's seared in my mind. I'm like, I'm in, and I was just begging for the chance, and of course there was nothing, and so it was really just some concepts that Steve and I had, and I just spent the summer getting married, recruiting staff, recruiting money, creating a name, creating a logo, and calling campus ministries in my, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Kentucky, and just some local area states, and just saying, "Hey, can we come? Do you trust us to come and give a message?"
Wow.
And it just picked up steam. And we celebrated our 20 years a few years ago, and we had 115 staff in the past that have come through our ministry.
Wow.
And just to think, oh my goodness. So yeah, I never thought, my wildest ideas, I never would have dreamed that 22 years later, we're not only continuing, but we're going strong, and we've got incredible leadership. And so all from a park bench and Shad casting vision and just believing in me to say yes.
Yeah, I don't remember that park bench. I remember the all-you-can-eat buffet at Kentucky Fried Chicken is all I can remember. See, well, brother, I was always fascinated. It's such a humorous story. Also, we're going to get into the traveling team in a few minutes, but Trey Smith, one of my great friends and co-laborers, happened to be on the Northeastern State campus and met this wild and crazy college student named Todd. But briefly tell us that story. It's always been a humorous but powerful story to me, Todd.
Man, it's you're taking me back in time. My freshman year of college, I came in, like many people, I had kind of a Christian idea of who I was, but my main goal was to rush and party. Like those, like that. I mean, and every guy's like, yes, so my main goal was to I had Christian ideas and roots, but my main goal was to rush and by week 9 of my freshman year, I knew that was kind of an empty idea of just a party scene, and I knew I needed to live for something bigger. I just didn't know what. There wasn't any campus ministry necessarily on my campus. There wasn't a crew. There wasn't InterVarsity. And so I was kind of lost in this middle world of like, man, I want to make an impact. I'm a Lambda Chi. I've got 90 frat brothers that need the gospel, but like I've got no training and no idea. And really, one of the older members on campus said, "Hey, I just got a phone call from this guy, and he's got a summer project. Do you want to consider going on it?" And he drove over from Fayetteville to Tahlequah and presented this summer project idea. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is exactly the training I needed. And so after that summer project, as many even campus ministers can attest, when they went on project, you want to go back and just reach your campus for Christ. And so I made a list of my fraternity brothers, tried to share the gospel with all of them, was like crossing out each one that was like a yes, no, or maybe, circling back with them, using the things that Steve Shadrack was kind of pioneering on campus at Fayetteville, and taking it to Northeastern and saying, man, Lord, just use me here like God's using, like you're using stuff at University of Arkansas. And so that was what happened. That was kind of how I cut my teeth on ministry as a college student. Being in a fraternity, I always had 90 guys, immediate access to share with. Yeah. And then taking the tools I learned from Trey and Steve and the summer project, it was a powerful moment for me.
That's what we're praying with this global project, is that ministries will lead their own summer project and see hungry students like you. I mean, that's the thing that I personally have a passion about, is where's the next Todd? Okay. Where's the next Steve? And if we can create training environments and systems and strategies and mobilize those leaders, then I just believe God has those people in the harvest. And so it's super encouraging to hear your story. And then did kind of a ministry rise up from the people that you were reaching in your fraternity there? What kind of developed there?
Yeah, it was wild because I'd never participated in a large group meeting, and all of a sudden by my sophomore year, I've got like 10 students coming to the student union, and I'm like, this is a miracle. It's like we have over 10.
Yes.
And then by my senior year, we would have 40 students come to my living room, and I would invite a campus staff from a neighboring university because we didn't have any staff to come speak. And so they would drive an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours to come speak to the group of 40. And again, it was incredible. We had a list of all the fraternities, the sororities. We had key leaders. We were sending teams to summer projects. We were sending them to winter conferences. And when I graduated, just to say, man, I have these 5 or 6 people left in these 3 sororities and 3 fraternities. And so, man, the legacy just continued. And what's crazy, I'll tell you this. What's crazy is last year I was invited to speak at a winter conference, and Northeastern was there. I saw NSU on like the name. I was like, oh my gosh, 22 years later, we still have NSU students coming to this winter conference. And so they had what's called campus time. And I found on the brochure where NSU was on campus time. And I was like, I want to go hug these 4 or 5 students and just tell them I love them. And I can't believe the movement's continued. I'm like, maybe they're in a corner, they're in a hallway. Like, surely that's, I mean, you've got like K-State, you've got U of A, you got Mizzou, you got, UT. And I was like, where's my little NSU flock? And I found the room and I opened the door, and I kid you not, there's 115 students.
Wow.
There was 115 students in that room 22 years later. And one of the students looked at me and is like, whose dad are you? And I was like, what? And I was like, I was literally like, I was fighting back tears because I was like, I can't believe 22 years later, 115 students. I mean, I would have never have dreamed it.
Wow.
Just praying and using these principles and having a platform. Oh my gosh, 3 P's. Praying, using these principles, and having a platform. Because a lot of people, they might pray and use principles, but they don't have a platform of lost people.
Yeah.
And then some people they have a platform and they're not praying, or some people are praying and they have a platform, but they don't have principles. We should market that. I'm just saying, like, when you have all 3, it's so powerful.
That sounds like that'd be a good CMT article, actually. So we're gonna commission you to write that after this.
Yeah.
But what comes to my mind is that Jesus said the kingdom of God is like a mustard seed. It starts small and then it kind of multiplies over time. And just that idea of sometimes students, when we equip them to be in a affinity group, in a sphere of influence, and we're giving them those principles and all that, and delegating that's when we see the movements on the campus, is that the students are really the front lines. So yeah, we could I love that. We could talk about all that all day, but we want to kind of move over to the traveling team. As you were talking about the traveling team, 20 years, that's amazing. I'm trying to wrap my mind around about how many campus talks that would be. I don't know if you know the number on that. And then also, can you briefly summarize kind of what the heart of that message is that you guys have been sharing and refining over the years?
Yeah. So, I mean, we really believe from meeting one. I remember our first meeting. It was Oklahoma University. It was the Baptist Campus Ministries, and there were 400 students, and my heart was pounding because I'm like, oh my goodness, I get what's called a lapel mic. This is big time. I've stepped into big time, And I remember just from the first meeting until today, 22 years later, we still believe that the Bible speaks the loudest. And so we come in, and what we want to do is we want to show that missions is not just a New Testament idea. It didn't start with the Great Commission. It started actually in Genesis 12. And so what we do is just say Genesis 12, 1-4. Abraham, leave your country, your people, your father's household, and go to the land I will show you. I'm going to make you a great nation, and through you all nations will be blessed. And we just say, man, the mission of God begins right here in Genesis 12. This is the mission of God. And really everything else on God's heart for the nation is going to be Genesis 12 on repeat. Everything else. So Genesis 26 was Isaac. It's Genesis 12 on repeat. Isaac, I'm going to bless you to bless the nations. Genesis 28, Jacob, I'm going to bless you to bless the nations. And so we want to come into the campus ministry and say, man, look, starting in Genesis 12, Genesis 26, Genesis 28, you have all these incredible Old Testament passages. Every Old Testament passage is to show God's fame in reaching the nations, and go back to Genesis 12. And then, of course, we transition to the New Testament, and you've got so much incredible Genesis 12 moments in the New Testament. I mean, the 5 great commissioning, the Matthew 28, the Mark 16, the Luke 24, John 20, 21, Acts 1:8. I mean, we walk through the campus ministry, all 5 of those, and say, look, these are the last words of Jesus, and he's just repeating Genesis 12. And then, of course, the great Paul the Apostle wrote 13 books in our New Testament. I mean, think about what he was thinking in Romans 15:20. It's always been my ambition. Where is the gospel not? And so we finished the night with that question, where has the gospel not gone? And we just show the unreached peoples of the world, and then the culmination of Revelation 5:9, every tribe, tongue, and nation standing before the throne, that great vision of John. And then just turning it back to the student and saying, man, if you're a Christ follower, you need to be involved, and you're involved with either a goer or a sender. And then just encouraging them to plug in with what that campus ministry is doing. So that's kind of the big picture message. We call it just the mission of God, but it's anchored in Genesis 12, and it runs through Scripture, the meta narrative. And it's a powerful night bringing the mission of God to these students.
Yeah, and that's really the kind of the single message that they've been doing, Paul, for over 20 years now, every single night on a different campus. And Todd is the one who takes these young graduates and teaches them and trains them how to give this message, and kind of transforms a young guy that's really never given a message into one, a fantastic speaker and deliverer of this biblical message. It's really fantastic. I think you've got the gift of teaching, Todd, and if there's a gift of training, I think you're a great trainer too. But you can train these young men and send them out all across the U.S., all across the world, and so you've been able to multiply yourself in a powerful way. But I wanted to ask you something personally. How have you been able to stay in the saddle all these years, Paul? I mean, Todd, I'm thinking of at least 20 years, you've continued to stay focused. This generation seems to kind of want to move from this to this to this every couple of years. But for over 20 years, you've continually focused on mobilizing primarily U.S. students to embrace God's heart for the world. What's kept you in the saddle all those years, Todd?
Man, I think it was just the power of hearing the message and seeing for the first time that there's something bigger to live for. The world invites me to pick my purpose, right? And most people pick relationships. Most people pick resume or money. And even Christians will pick their purpose of like resume, relationships, and money. And I think when I heard the mission of God and I heard the Genesis to Revelation when I was a student on a summer project, I mean, I looked at my friend and I was like, that's why I was born. Like, yes. that's why I was born. And it changed me. And I never even became a missionary as far as I'm more of a mobilizer and a sender, but it changed me. I didn't own a passport. I'd never been overseas. I didn't know a missionary. I couldn't tell you the capital of a country. I mean, I had no idea. I was living in me world. I was living in self-absorption. And it changed me. Here's what it changed. It changed how I viewed ministry on campus. It changed how I viewed my major. It changed my zip code I lived in after I graduated. It changed what I was looking for in a mate. It changed. You ready for this? It changed how I named my kids. I now name all my kids after missionaries. Who does that when you're self-absorbed? Nobody, And so there's just, when I think about what keeps me in the saddle, I mean, holy cow, are you ready for this? 4,300 campus ministry meetings, 600,000 students over the last 22 years. But every time we look at on that audience, we see ourselves. We see us as a freshman or sophomore who's like, what if? Let's play the what if game. What if no one ever came to Northeastern State and told me about God's heart for the world, where would I be right now? I'd be doing my life in me world, going to church and tithing, maybe going to small group, but my life revolves around my savings, my safety, my resume, and my hobbies. That's what my life would be. And so what we want to do is we want to come in and say, man, what better people too? You asked about U.S. students. Man, we've just kind of stayed focused on U.S. students. I mean, for a variety of reasons. I mean, one of the reasons is our primary language is English. When you think of the mission force, you can get in most countries using English.
Yep.
The university students and what they do with business is missions. The U.S. students and their pioneer mentality that I can go anywhere. And then specifically that age group, we love the 18 to 25-year-olds because, as we all know, the mortgage and the marriages and the kids and you know, all the world is their parish. And so we just keep coming. We've tried to leave the U.S. students and we just can't. Like, we just love them so much and just realize, man, they still, I mean, God's doing amazing things on Frontier Mobilization, but there's something just really still unique about that U.S. student that we want to continue to send out.
Well, we've always said, Todd, you and I, that we believe they're the most recruitable, trainable, and sendable category of persons on the planet. And so that's just, you know, so strategic. We're going to actually talk about the student volunteer movement after a while. That's a great love for Todd and I. We have both our wives told us to get a hobby. So we decided we were going to choose the student volunteer movement as our hobby, right? Todd, one question on this, that you were sharing a little bit of the results of the number of students, the number of campus, et cetera. And I know it's hard to measure the impact. I remember one story, these 4 missionaries were in a big closed country in the East, and they were sharing their stories as they were settling into their team, you know, about how they were mobilized. And lo and behold, they went around the circle to share their story. And all 4 of them had been mobilized in different part of the country, a different campus, by this group called the Traveling Team. And they were laughing and crying at the same time. But Todd, how would you describe over the last 20 plus years the overall influence, impact of the Traveling Team? What has God done through that ministry? What would you share about that?
Well, I mean, as 20 years, it's there's so many incredible stories. One that sticks out, just that happened recently. When I first started the Traveling Team, I met a guy named Ralph who was moving to Yemen, and we just connected over coffee and we kept in touch a little bit. And then we would, every like decade, you know, he would re-email me, and it was like this weird, like, I'm doing U.S. mobilization and he's in Yemen and then over other Middle East countries. And really in January of this year, he sent me an email and said, hey, can we Zoom? And so we just started reconnecting. And one of the things he said, I mean, here a guy, he's the Middle Eastern director of a major organization. He's been there for 22 years. And he just really in passing, before we finished our phone call, he said, I just want to tell you something, Todd. He said, every mountainside in the Middle East that has a missionary has the fingerprint of the Traveling Team. He said, every mountainside in the Middle East that has a missionary. He says, I've yet to meet a missionary where the Traveling Team is not either the beginning, the middle, or the end of their story.
Wow.
He's like, maybe it was the aha moment, or maybe it was the middle push to get him to break off that relationship with Mr. Loser, you know? Or maybe it was the final straw that said, I can raise support and I can go overseas and I can use my business skills. That was incredible. I'm like, oh my goodness, you know? And again, it was either the beginning, middle, or end, but he's like, man, and then, I mean, I got an email, a random email came through the travelingteam.org asking for me, and our office staff sent it to me. And it basically said this. It was like, hey, my name's Jeremy, and I'm the pastor, head pastor of First Baptist Minneapolis. And he's like, 14 years ago, a guy named Todd Ahrend came to our campus, and he challenged me as a freshman to use my summers wisely. He's like, I spent my first summer on a summer project. I spent my second summer in Thailand. I spent my third summer in China. He's like, then I even moved to China as a missionary. I came back and went to seminary. Now I'm head pastor and I want to mobilize my church. Is the guy named Todd Ahrend and the traveling team still out there? I just spoke at his church. He brought me in for like a 4-talk series. He's introducing me like, let me tell you something crazy. I met the traveling team my freshman year, and that's why I'm here as a pastor. Wow. And so just, you know, and those aren't anomalies. Those are just stories you have because the message is so powerful. The message is so powerful. But for us, the traveling team, the number one way we measure results, it's very simple. Here's our best result we have. 100% of every student we speak to is invited into the mission of God. And it's up to them whether or not they respond. But we've got a 100% invite radius. And so that's what we continue to say is our best result.
I love it, man. It just hits me, and just all of us that are on the call listening to this podcast are working with college students in one way or another. And I think that just reminds me of how important this stage of life is, and what we do to build in godly convictions and those things. And I wanted to give a shout out to the girl, whoever's listening to this podcast, that needs to break up with that guy. This is your time. This is your moment.
That loser.
Yeah. Lose the loser. Go for God's mission. Okay, God's speaking to someone right now. But I just think, man, it's so important that just a good reminder that God uses His word. God honors His word, and so you guys have built the traveling team on God's word, and that's something that just has power. And God's Spirit comes behind that and just works in amazing ways. We've had students like, actually a traveling team rep came to Chico State, and actually one of the worst sinners on our campus got saved that night after talking to a traveling team rep for like a while after the meeting. And he became like our best evangelist. He led 12 people to Christ the next semester. And so there's just like this blessing that God blesses obedience. And so, man, it's just been so encouraging to see. So you guys come and you give a talk, and then what does the follow-up process look like? I know you do a meeting. Sometimes it's one-on-one, sometimes it's in groups. What do you do with people? Is there a tool that you use? And then what does that follow-up process look like?
Yeah, so what we do, the typical night is that the campus ministry would say, hey, we have announcements and worship, and then we invite up the traveling team for the rest of the meeting. And so we typically ask for at least 40 minutes of the large group meeting. And the large group meeting is really the front door of our mobilization. And we start, after the MC announces this or whatever, we start with a 25-minute talk, as I mentioned before, just walking them through Genesis 12 to Revelation. And after 25 minutes, what we do is we say, okay, now we're going to transition to part 2. And so if you need to be somewhere, if you got to go to a study hall or whatever, you're free to leave, but we're going to transition to part 2. So just stay where you're at if you don't have to leave, and we're going to get practical. And then in part 2, we show something that's called the World Vision illustration. And what's incredible is so few people leave. And so we just want to connect the student with the practical steps. So yeah, part 1, big picture, meta narrative, the scriptures. Part 2 is just this simple, what we call the World Vision illustration. And then we pair the students with what the campus ministry is doing. So the campus ministry has said, hey, our partnerships are Ethiopia and Kenya. And so we highlight those ministry opportunities. Or, hey, we're trying to get a lot of these students to a summer project in San Diego where they can get training and then continue from there. And so our process is to come in, do a big picture, do a practical, and then really pair those students with what the campus ministry is doing. And so it's a win-win, because for us, we get the audience of the students and really bring some cutting edge missions vision. But also the campus ministry is like, this is great. An outside voice is telling them everything I've been trying to tell them, but now they hear it differently. I mean, as we all know, there's power in the outside voice. And so that's kind of our way that we developed to mobilize students.
And Todd, is there anything the next day? Do y'all move on to the next campus at that point? Is there any one-on-ones you try to do? Or I know that some mission agencies help sponsor you guys, and you try to do some pairing up possibly with some of the agencies. What else y'all have going on in those arenas?
Well, for some campus ministries, they have incredible opportunities if you want to minister with college students or stay within that college world. Some campus ministries we go to say, hey, we don't have anything. We've just got some local stuff. And so many campus ministries, I mean, well over 90% have said, hey, if I have someone in medical, if I have something in counseling, if we have someone in social work, and they want to do that, that's the skill they've been using. Do you have anything for them? And so we found really fast that we need to develop relationships with organizations that are just tried and true that we can pair students with if the campus ministry says yes and gives us the green light. Our priority is with that campus ministry. I mean, we're the guests, and so we want to feel what they're doing. But if the campus ministry is like, man, I don't know how to deal with this pre-med student who wants to be a doctor in Addis Ababa, like I've got nothing. And then we're able to come in and say, okay, we've got 22 years of relational equity, and so we can help the student out. And so that's kind of how that works.
Todd, as you were talking, I was thinking about, my past in college ministry, a lot of years, the 80s and the 90s. I'm thinking back, we could hold big mission conferences back then. We can, remember SCOWY, student conferences on world evangelization, and big concerts of prayer for the world. And students seem to be, willing to flock to them and even make lifelong decisions. And it seems different to me now. It seems like we almost are afraid to hold big events like that, or we're afraid to challenge students to somehow make a public commitment to missions. Maybe I'm just paranoid, I don't know, but what have you seen over the last 20 years in terms of students' openness and hunger to hear and respond to a radical commitment to reach the world for Christ? Is it the same, or has it changed? What's your opinion?
In just my own personal past 22 years and then studying pretty in depth the last 200, what's interesting is though aspects of life has changed, right? Man, the hunger for the something bigger has always been there. Mm-hmm. I mean, I love the quote by William Carey as he leaves England in 1792 for India, and he looks at his church and he's like, we can do this. We have the compass.
Wow.
Like he said, we have the compass. He's like, what can possibly, we have the mariner's compass. And that was like, that for him was Google, in flight. He was like, we can do this. And I just think, man, today we just see such a hunger with students in so many different ways. I mean, how many stay for part 2? How many want to start now? They're like, yeah, I don't want to wait till the summer to go on, summer project. I want to start now. How do I start now? How do I pray? How to reach international? We see the hunger as campus ministries continue to invite us in. I mean, it's just really incredible that they see the need, that there's a hunger for students. We see a hunger at how many workers have been sent out over the last 20 years. And so, again, I think the students have seen how many of their parents have picked their own purpose and they're miserable. And they don't, I mean, you ask the average student, man, do you want a marriage and a job like your mom and a passion for like your parents? And many of them are going to be like, oh no. And so you come along and say, man, well, here's the purpose God has for you. And it's in Genesis 12, where he changes you to change the world. And it might look like you going, it might look like you sending. And man, they grab onto that and they say, please help me start. Give me a path to run on. Give me resources. And just the snowball starts, and you see this hunger for changing them and to change the world.
Love it, man. That's so good. And I see it. I think there's definitely a hunger and a passion for the nations and for evangelism even, and disciple making. And so we're seeing those things happen. And, I know all of us, we're praying for a second student volunteer movement. That's something I'm praying. And maybe not everyone that's listening to this podcast would know what that is. Maybe they heard of it briefly. But I have two questions. Can you briefly summarize what the student volunteer movement is? and then answer what are some things we need to see happen, or even some strategies to see another one happen in our generation.
Yeah, well, as far as the student volunteer movement goes, if you were to kind of chart the history of missions, the peak, the mountaintop would be what we would call the student volunteer movement. And really it happens between like 1886 and 1920.
Mm-hmm.
And it started with a guy named Luther Wishart, who was traveling campus to campus with an organization called the YMCA. And he was just in charge of helping young men grow in their walk with God. And he hears a story of the Haystack prayer meeting that happened 80 years before that was really the beginnings of the missions movement in America. He hears this story that happened 80 years earlier in 1806 called the Haystack prayer meeting. And he gets fired up. He starts dreaming. He's like, man, I'm on all these campuses. I have access to all these young men. What if I held a 4-week summer project, get my good friend D.L. Moody to speak on the book of Matthew the entire 4 weeks from 9 to noon. Imagine hearing that. Mm-hmm. And so he has this vision of like, what if I held a 4-week conference? We could have it at D.L. Moody's boarding school called Mount Hermon. And so he spends from like February to June. Like, that's not long. He spends from February to June, and he recruits 251. He had to be a male. He recruits 251 men from 89 universities. But he wants it to kind of be a missions mobilization time. But he knew that from the platform wouldn't be as powerful as from the students themselves. And so he goes to his alma mater, Princeton, and recruits a guy named Robert Wilder, who started the Princeton Students for Foreign Missions. He was on his way to India. He had like 27 students going with him to India. And he gets Robert Wilder to come to this 4-week conference. And man, D.L. Moody takes to the stage and Robert Wilder takes to prayer. And they are praying for 100. Can 100 of the 251 sign on to be missionaries across the ocean? And so, after the first week, there's like 27. After the second week, there's over 50. After the third week, there's like 85. And on that last day of the conference, Robert Wilder gets up and he says, hey, the next message is fairly simple. It's called All Should Go and Go to All. And then he's like, if you want to be a cross-cultural missionary, we want you to do a few things. We want you to sign what number are you and how many are we going to have. We want you to tell the country you're going to go to. We want you to tell the date you're graduating so we can hold you accountable to sell to that country. And then we want you to stand in front of the building, the cafeteria hall, and we're going to take a picture of you. And so I have the picture on my desk. It's just called the Mount Hermon 100, and it was exactly 100. Wow. And so that was the beginning of the student volunteer movement. But Luther Wishart, he's scratching his head. He's like, how many women weren't invited? How many other men weren't able to come because they had to take care of their father's farm or their father's health or other responsibilities? And so he's like, man, what if from the 100 we had 2 students go campus to campus and just tell the story? And of course, Robert Wilder, who was one of the key thinkers of the Mount Hermon 100, he was like, I'll go. And he got his really good friend named John Foreman to go with him. And I mean, imagine this, from 1886 to 1887, Robert Wilder and John Foreman travel to 162 campuses.
Wow.
And they recruit 2,106 students to be missionaries. I mean, just to blow your mind, as of 1885, America had only sent 1,900 missionaries in its history. Wow. Now, in 1 year, Robert Wilder and John Foreman recruit 2,106. They doubled the missionary force. I mean, that's the power. That's the power of university students. And so after that year, they came back to Wishart, and Wishart's like, oh my gosh, we got to have a few things. We've got to name the movement, and we need a leader of the movement. And so they decided, Robert Wilder was like, I already have a name. Foreman and I have been calling it the SVM. And Wishart's like, SVM, what does that mean? And he's like, well, students aren't asking the question, am I called or not? They're just saying, can I volunteer? So let's call it the student volunteer movement. I mean, think about this. The president of Princeton University, imagine the president of Princeton now saying this. The president of Princeton said this. After seeing the student volunteer movement, he said, has any such offering of young men and women ever happened in our age, in any age, except that of Pentecost? That was from the president of Princeton. I mean, so that's what we would call the student volunteer movement. And the result was over 20,000 sailed. They were goers, but over 80,000 stayed behind to be senders. Again, you need both, the goers and the senders.
Wow. I love that, man. That is so good. And I would want to encourage any of our listeners to check out Todd's book on the student volunteer movement called In This Generation. And man, if that just moved you like it did me, man, it hit me. I encourage you to check out the book In This Generation.
Yeah, I love that book. And Todd and I have a great love for the student volunteer movement and praying, saying, Lord, what is it going to take? What is it going to take to create a second student volunteer movement among us? And so that's a big prayer of ours. And Todd, you know that this particular podcast, Campus Ministry Today, that we're focused on helping really inspire and equip church-based and campus-based collegiate workers and student leaders around the world to kind of get back and stay focused on the Great Commission. And we just kind of call that EDM, evangelism, disciple making, mission mobilization. We don't want to leave out that third component, but many times it is. Todd, you've observed that. We know ministries that are strong in their witnessing or maybe strong in their discipling, but they just haven't connected all the dots to include why do you think it gives left out many times of campus ministries, college ministries, Todd? And what advice could you give to the staff and student leaders watching or listening today to really make that not only present, but one of the more prominent aspects of their overall ministry? What advice would you give?
Well, I'll answer that by telling a story. That is, I remember getting a news feed across my phone, and it was something called COVID, and it was in China, and I didn't care. I didn't care because I was in the middle of Mandalorian, and so I remember. Then a week later, I get this thing, and it's COVID is in Wuhan, China, and something about bats, and I was like, when am I going to go to China? Never. So I didn't care. It was, COVID was a distant crisis, and then I read, it started coming across that Italy shut down. And now I knew it wasn't called COVID. I knew it was called COVID. But again, for me, it was still a distant crisis. It was in Italy. I didn't care. China, Italy, I'm not traveling international in the next decade. And then I remember getting a news feed that the first case in Washington happened in the U.S. And then I remember when I got a news feed that it was in Arkansas, the first case in Arkansas. And then I remember when my wife tested positive. And all of a sudden, I'm sitting on the couch going, oh my gosh, this distant crisis that was not about me or for me or something I should even consider became my new reality. And it changed. It changed my savings. It changed my the way I deal with my parents. It changed how I do church. It changed how my kids do school. It changed how I interact with my friends. It changed how I shop. It changed where I shop. It changed how I do church. This distant crisis suddenly became my new reality. And I think for many campus ministries and even students, we think about the unreached, they're over there. I've got so much near need around me on my campus. I've got so many lost frat and shorty and dorm, and I've got to, continue my leadership development. And that's kind of a distant crisis. And I think what God wants us to understand is, man, that distant crisis needs to become our new reality. And how can I take this distant crisis of the unreached? How can I take this distant crisis of those who've never heard the gospel and bring that into my students, my student leaders, and even in my own life to say, man, I need to reach the campus, but I'm reaching the campus not just to reach the campus. I'm reaching the campus to reach the world. And so for me, I cut my teeth on Luke 10:2. Luke 10:2 is something that, like, the 9 words of Jesus in Luke 10:2 is so powerful. The harvest is plentiful, the workers are few. And really recently, I've been breaking that down and trying to figure out what it means. And I think about that Luke 10:2, 9 words of Christ, the harvest. Who's the harvest? The harvest are the lost near us, but they're also the lost away from us, like they're the far off lost. Who's the harvest? The harvest are the lost, both those in our life on our campus, but also on the other parts of the world. The harvest. And then it says the harvest is plentiful. Plentiful What does it mean plentiful? The unreached are growing at 70,000 a day. Wow. The unreached are growing at 26 million a year. I mean, are you ready for this fact? Let me just throw this out at you. Finland is 70% Christian. The average kids per household in Finland is 2. Switzerland is 60% Christian. The average kids per household in Switzerland is 2. The UK is 70% Christian. The average kids per household in the UK is 2. America is 86% Christian. The average kids per household in America is 2. Burkina Faso, the average kids per household is 8. Burkina Faso is 99% Muslim. In Niger, the average kids per household is 9. Niger is 99% Muslim. In Afghanistan, the average kids per household is 7. Afghanistan is 99% Muslim. In Pakistan, the average kids per household is 6. In Pakistan, it is 98% Muslim. The harvest is great and it's growing. And we need to understand this distant crisis needs to become our reality. If we're a campus minister trying to reach our campus, we're reaching our campus to reach the world. 9 words: the harvest, the lost here and there. It's plentiful. Oh my goodness, we just saw that. The workers are those involved in your ministry that you're trying to help see that Genesis 12 is their purpose and passion. The workers are those involved in your ministry, and you're trying to help them see that it's their purpose and passion. And then Jesus utters like some of the saddest words of his public ministry. He says about the workers, they're few.
Right.
They're few. And it's like, how are they few? I mean, today, 2 out of every 7 people claims to be Christian. How are they few? How is that even possible? 2 out of every 7 people breathing claim to be Christian. So how are the workers few? They're few, and every campus ministry can answer this correctly. They're few because a lot of the workers are self-absorbed. Right. They're few because a lot of the workers are ignorant. No one's ever told them. I mean, here I'm a freshman wanting to give my life for something, but I just never heard of the Genesis 12 idea. They're few because we're self-absorbed. They're few because we're just ignorant. We need to be educated. But they're also few because the unreached are hard to reach. Mm-hmm. I mean, the State Department has just issued 23 travel warnings. The State Department has issued 23 warnings in 23 countries of those in the 1040 window. The unreached are hard to reach. And so how can we make missions more important? I think it's just taking that idea of, man, this distant crisis is our new reality. And my new proponent, I mean, how cool would this be? How cool would this be if we literally, within the next 50 years, reverse the verse? What if we could see the verse reverse? What if in 50 years we looked up and said, oh my goodness, the harvest is few. The workers are plentiful.
Amen.
The harvest, oh man, after 50 years of seeing the distant crisis become our reality, it's few. Yeah. And we have so many workers.
Oh, man, that is so good. I think that's getting me so fired up. And I'm thinking about the average, or there's a lot of people listening to the podcast that might be thinking, yes, I want to mobilize students for missions. I want to be all about that. But if they're honest, they don't have a lot of foundation, even in their knowledge or kind of vision for these things. They kind of have this vague idea of what missions is. So can you give us a list of maybe 3 to 5 books, or even just podcasts or videos or resources or classes that you would recommend someone to kind of, before we can mobilize our students, we have to mobilize ourselves. So.
Yeah, I think for me, when I get asked this with a student, wherever they're at from 0 to zealot, I just say, man, the first thing you gotta do is get exposure. The heart can't feel what the eye hadn't seen. The first thing you got to do is get exposure. And so what does getting exposure mean? It means looking in the student union for the foreigner among you. It means seeing the international student in your dorm or in your biology class and initiating with them. They will not initiate with you. You have to step out. The first way is just to get exposure. I mean, maybe going on a summer project, but that's in the summer. You've got 16 weeks in the fall, 16 weeks in the spring. You got to start now. And so meeting internationals, getting exposure. I think the other thing is get some knowledge, exposure and knowledge. And so, man, put up a world map, start praying for the world. Maybe in the spring, say, man, I want the 65 countries in the 1040 window. I want to pray through all 65 by May. Get some great mission books, and they're out there, some mission resources. And so if you want to get started, you got to get exposure and you got to get knowledge. And one of the things we did as the traveling team, this just hit the press, and it's called 101 Ways to Impact the World. And what we did is specifically, we said, okay, we want to give you 101 ways to reach the world, and only one, the last one, is go on an overseas trip. The first 100 is broken down into, here's 25 ways to pray. Here's 25 ways to give. Here's 25 ways to welcome. Here's 25 ways to mobilize. And so really for the first 100, you don't even have to leave your campus to do any of them. And so that's a free PDF download on our website, thetravelingteam.org. You can go to 101 Ways to Impact the World, or you can buy it on Amazon as a book. But that's just a fantastic way to say, hey, I'm not going overseas anytime soon. Does that mean I don't have a role to play? No. We found 100 ways that you can impact your campus even before going overseas. So get exposure, get some knowledge. When I think of some resources, when I think of a few books, I'll give you a few. I personally wrote one called The Abrahamic Revolution to kind of start people on the journey. And so I took myself as a college student and thought, what did I need to know? Who was at a 0, and how would I move them from a 0 to a 3? And so I organized the Abrahamic Revolution. I call it the Abrahamic Revolution because it's anchored in Genesis 12. Right. And the first five chapters is just a biblical understanding of the mission of God. The middle section of the book is every major world religion, how they view sin, salvation, the afterlife, and how you can share the gospel with them. And the last section is how to be a global Christian. So obviously that's out there. It's called the Abrahamic Revolution. Another great resource is one called Missions in the Old Testament by a guy named Walter Kaiser. It's only about 70 pages, but it is power packed. We have all our staff read it before they hit the road. Walter Kaiser, Missions in the Old Testament. And he just shows you again that it's not just the Great Commission that starts the ball rolling. 2,000 years before Jesus gave the Great Commission, we see Abraham. And really, Jesus repeated Genesis 12. And so that's what Walter Kaiser brings. He brings more of the theological understanding of like, where is missions in the Old Testament? And then the mother of all, if you're like, man, I want to get amped up, the mother of all, I would say, is called The Mission of God by Christopher Wright. The Mission of God by Christopher Wright is going to cost you $30, but it's going to be 589 pages. Wow. 589 pages. And if you end up reading The Mission of God, if you're like, hey, man, Abrahamic Revolution is too easy, Missions in the Old Testament by Kaiser is too small. If you're looking for the opus, The Mission of God by Christopher Wright, if you read that, you're going to know more about God's heart for the world than probably anyone in your world. So those are some great resources. 101 Ways to Impact the World, the Abrahamic Revolution, Missions in the Old Testament, and the Mission of God. Pick where you want to go.
I'll jump in here also, and I know a number of our listeners probably are familiar with the Perspectives class, Todd, perspectives.org. And that reader that goes along with that what usually a 15, 16-week class is a life changer. And there's offered all over the U.S., all over the world, perspectives.org. I remember asking Dr. Winter, Ralph Winter, the founder of the U.S. Center for World Mission and the Perspectives course, Dr. Winter, when someone takes Perspectives, are they pretty much a kind of an expert on missions? And he started laughing. Oh, no. Those are just the little ABCs, the little training wheel beginning steps, And I felt a little overwhelmed by that. But there's so much we can learn, so much we can gain, and the ideas of exposure and knowledge. What Todd is saying is so true. The website that he mentioned, thetravelingteam.org, I've been bragging on that website for 20 years now, Todd.
Yeah.
Because I've been involved a little bit with it, but you've got this team of folks that have just been packing this thing. And I kind of present it wherever I go as there's no website anywhere on the planet that is as packed with tools, articles, resources, all kinds of things to mobilize your family, yourself, your campus. your students. And so please, we're going to put that website in the show notes, but it is an amazing resource. But we're going to start winding things down here in a minute, Todd. We've taken a great amount of your time. We're so appreciative, but do a couple of quick commercials for us. We want to know about this IT project. I remember I wanted to call it some big name, Global Impact Mobilization Summer. And Todd just goes, no, we're just going to call it IT. I go, what do you mean IT? Is this a Stephen King novel or something? What is this, And no, it's intensive training during the summer. So do a quick commercial on the IT project, but also this speaking ministry that you and Claude have developed that you can take to conferences and take to churches and so forth. Do a couple of quick commercials on those two for us, Todd, if you would.
Yeah, well, first of all, 22 years ago, we realized, man, college students just want more specific missions training and how to mobilize their peers. And so we started a summer project. Again, it's called IT Project for Intensive Training. And we go out to Los Angeles. We rent out a dorm on a college campus, and 7 weeks. Each week is focused on a different religion. So the first week might be Islam, the second week Buddhism, the third week Hinduism, the fourth week tribalism, atheism. And during those weeks, we fly in experts on that world religion who are Christ followers. And so we'll have an expert on how to reach Muslims. How do you share the gospel? And where is Jesus in the Quran? And what did the Quran get right? What did the Quran get off? And so we bring in experts, but also the practical side of how can you go back and start a student movement on your campus? Mm-hmm. And so for 7 weeks, these students from all over the U.S. on colleges all over the U.S. are coming to California. And for the first time, they're getting exposed. But then the heart can't feel what the eye hadn't seen. So we take them to the mosque. We take them to the Hindu temple. We watch in the Hindu temple them bathe the gods and perform their ceremonies. And we interact with the priests and the imams, and we just ask them questions, just as learners. And man, students get fired up. And then to tell them also on the weekends you're going to be surfing, it's just even extra. So that's called the IT Project. If you're interested, go to itproject.la and you can check it out. And then what we realized is that there's a lot of churches that want this idea of the traveling team packaged in more of a church setting. And so we started something called Mission Revolution. And so it's at missionrev.org. And what we do is we come into your church, and on a Sunday morning, we give the biblical basis of missions in 1, 2, or 3 services. And then we have some afternoon optional sessions that we do. And so on the campus side, in collegiate ministries, we've got the travelingteam.org. But then if you're like, man, how can I mobilize my church? I want my church to hear this. We bring in an older traveling team speaker, and they give the big picture, Genesis to Revelation. And it's basically somewhere every weekend we're doing a missions rev. It's really taken off, as you can tell. Just the church understands they need to find their role and passion.
I love it. And also, you guys do conferences. If there's a winter conference for students or a summer project, the traveling team is available to come share and do conference messages as well. So Todd, thank you so much for sharing your heart and your vision. I know we could go for several more hours. I love it so much. But would you pray for our listeners and pray that God would do the impossible again, like you did in the student volunteer movement?
Yes, Lord, we just come before you, and to all those listening, we just ask that your passion would become our passion. That what's important to you would become important to us. Lord, just that, again, just this distant crisis that we would realize as believers, it permeates our heart. And I pray just right now, just for the practical understanding, the practical side of this, where you would just, when we see that international across the campus, that you just, though our heart is beating and we're so nervous that we have so many unknowns, that we would be the initiator. Like you initiated with us, Lord, that we would initiate with them. And Lord, that we could see the nations reach really from the campus to the world. And Lord, thank you for the students and staff all across the U.S. and world listening to this. And I pray that it bears fruit 30, 60, and 100-fold. In your
Yes,
name.
Lord. Thanks, Todd. Really appreciate you. So grateful for you. Thank you, everyone listening, for joining us. It's been if this has been an encouragement to you, we'd love to get some help spreading the word. And so please subscribe, leave a 5-star review. We really appreciate that. We're shameless. We want the 5 stars. And we'd love to connect with you guys on social media, and also the Campus Ministries Today website. So until then, let's go and make disciples.